are happy that you could all join us at this time to remember the work of the United Lodge of Theosophists. We begin with a reading of the Declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists, and it'll be read in a way that you've never heard before or will likely hear again. So we begin with the reading of the Declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists in 7 different languages.
Het richtsnoer van deze loge is onafhankelijke toewijding aan de belangen van de theosofie. De loge staat buiten elke theosofische organisatie. Ze blijft getrouw aan de grote stichters van de theosofische beweging en houdt zich niet op met oneenigheden of persoonlijke meningsverschillen.
Die anstehende Aufgabe und das angestrebte Ziel sind zu fesseln und zu erhaben, als dass die Zeit oder Neigung ließen, sich auf Nebensächlichkeiten einzulassen. Diese Aufgabe und dieses Ziel bestehen in der Verbreitung der Grundprinzipien der theosophischen Philosophie und in deren praktischer Verwirklichung durch eine wahre Erkenntnis des Selbst, seiner durch eine tiefere Überzeugung von der universellen Brüderlichkeit.
यह मानता है कि थियोसफिस्टों के बीच संघ के लिए अकाट्य आधार जहां भी और हालांकि स्थित है, उद्देश्य, लक्ष्य और शिक्षण की समानता है और इसलिए न तो संविधान, उपकानून और न ही अधिकारी है। इसके सहयोगियों के बीच एकमात्र बंधन यह आधार है और इसका उद्देश्य एकता को आगे बढ़ाने में थियोसफिस्टों के बीच इस विचार का प्रसार करना है।
Elle considère comme théosophes tous ceux qui se consacrent au véritable service de l'humanité, sans distinction de race, de croyance, de sexe, de condition ou d'affiliation à une organisation et
La Unión Liberal de Teósofos da la bienvenida a todas aquellas personas que estén de acuerdo con sus fines declarados y que deseen capacitarse mediante el estudio y otros medios para estar mejor preparadas a fin de ayudar y enseñar a los demás.
Onyansani ne nyamesom yɛ baako nso ohunu sɛ obiara yɛ ne nua. The true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all.
Satya nasti paro dharmaha. There is no religion higher than truth.
In 2026 brought about the a new publication of the Secret Doctrine. And so today we're going to look at the parent doctrine as it is introduced in the first 47 pages of the introduction to the Secret Doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky. She makes a rather shocking claim about this mysterious parent doctrine, communicated in prehistory and dating back to the lighting up of Manus on this planet. This body of esoteric teachings, the parent doctrine, as she calls it, is the fountain source from which all authentic spiritual communication emanates. Even more surprising is that such a parent doctrine, or perennial philosophy, was common knowledge before the modern era, and today's various and contentious and competing religious traditions exemplify and have within them this parent doctrine. The second aim of the Theosophical Society urges its members to explore the veracity of this claim for themselves. Could the teachings of Jesus, Buddha, Plato, Shankara, Lao Tzu, Krishna, and others possibly have a common root? One of the primary aims of the writing of the Secret Doctrine was to stake this claim and provide evidence. The missing ingredient in modern scholarship are the esoteric keys needed to unlock the casket of gold. Plato tells us that this casket of gold is knowledge or power, and therefore the parent doctrine can only be pointed to in hints, suggestions, and analogies. But despite its mysterious nature, and when we look at the universe, the earth, the human mind, and the human body, could we consider anything more mysterious than that? This work is to remind mankind of what Krishna variously calls in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Raja Yoga, that mighty art, that exhaustless, secret, eternal doctrine. These teachings are critical for the ongoing progress towards the ideal of universal enlightenment. The hope, we are told, is that the reestablishment of an awareness of the esoteric tradition, a wisdom tradition, if you will, would be an impetus to virtue, morality, and human solidarity, so desperately needed for mankind's long road ahead. We will now hear HPB's own explanation of the reality of the parent doctrine with some brief excerpts from the introduction read by Monica, Steve, and Shobha. Monica, have you unmuted?
This is the true reason, perhaps why the outline of a few fundamental truths from the secret doctrine of the archaic ages is now permitted to see the light after long millenniums of the most profound silence and secrecy. I say a few truths advisedly, because that which must remain unsaid could not be contained in 100 such volumes, nor could it be imparted to the present generation of Sadducees. But even the little that is now given is better than complete silence upon those vital truths. The world of today, in its mad career towards the unknown, which it is too ready to confound with the unknowable, whenever the problem eludes the grasp of the physicist, is rapidly progressing on the reverse material plane of spirituality. It has now become a vast arena, a true valley of discord and of eternal strife, a necropolis wherein lie buried the highest and the most holy aspirations of our spirit soul.
One of the greatest and withal the most serious objection to the correctness and reliability of the whole work will be the preliminary stanzas. Quote, how can the statements contained in them be verified? Unquote. True, if a great portion of the Sanskrit, Chinese, and Mongolian works quoted in the present volumes are known to some Orientalists, the chief work, that one from which the stanzas are given, is not in the possession of European libraries. The Book of Xian, or Tzan, is utterly unknown to our philologists, or at any rate was never heard of by them under its present name. This is, of course, a great drawback to those who follow the methods of research prescribed by official science. But to the students of occultism, and to every genuine occultist, this will be a little moment. The main body of the doctrines given is found scattered throughout hundreds and thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts, some already translated, disfigured in their interpretations, as usual. Others still awaiting their turn. Every scholar, therefore, has an opportunity of verifying the statements herein made, and of checking most of the quotations. A few new facts, new to the profane Orientalist only, and passages quoted from the commentaries will be found difficult to trace. Several of the teachings also have hitherto been transmitted orally, yet even those are in every instance hinted at in the almost countless volumes of Brahmanical Chinese and Tibetan temple literature.
More than one great scholar has stated that there never was a religious founder, whether Aryan, Semitic, or Turanian, who had invented a new religion or revealed a new truth. These founders were all transmitters, not original teachers. They were the authors of new forms and interpretations, while the truths upon which the latter were based were as old as mankind. Selecting one or more of these grand verities, actualities visible only to the eye of the real sage and seer, out of the many orally revealed to man in the beginning, preserved and perpetuated in the adita of the temples through initiation, during the mysteries, and by personal transmission. They revealed these truths to the masses. Thus, every nation received in its turn some of the said truths under the veil of their own local and special symbolism, which, as time went on, developed into a more or less philosophical cultus, a pantheon in mythical disguise.
I believe in the ancients and therefore I love them. This is from Mr. Max Mueller. The writer loves them too, and therefore believes in the ancients and the modern heirs to their wisdom. And believing in both, she now transmits that which she has received and learned herself to all those who will accept it. As to those who may reject her testimony, that is to say, the great majority, she will bear them no malice, for they will be as right in their way in denying as she is right in hers in affirming, since they look at truth from two entirely different standpoints. Agreeably, with the rules of critical scholarship, the Orientalist has to reject a priori whatever evidence he cannot fully verify for himself. And how can a Western scholar accept on hearsay that which he knows nothing about? Indeed, that which is given in these volumes is selected from oral as much as from written teachings. This first installment of the esoteric doctrines is based upon stanzas, which are the records of a people unknown to ethnology. It is claimed that they are written in a tongue absent from the nomenclature of languages and dialects with which philology is acquainted. They are said to emanate from a source, occultism, repudiated by science. And finally, they are offered through an agency incessantly discredited before the world by all those who hate unwelcome truths or have some special hobby of their own to defend.
The writer will have to give historical and trustworthy names and to cite well-known authors, ancient and modern, of recognized ability, good judgment, and truthfulness, as also to name some of the famous proficients in the secret arts and science, along with the mysteries of the latter, as they are divulged, or rather partially presented, before the public in their strange, archaic form. How is this to be done? What is the best way for achieving such an object? Was the ever-recurring question. To make our plan clearer, an illustration may be attempted. When a tourist coming from a well-known explored country suddenly reaches the borderland of terra incognita, hedged in from view by a formidable barrier of impassable rocks, he may still refuse to acknowledge himself baffled in his exploratory plans. Ingress beyond is forbidden, but if he cannot visit the mysterious region personally, he may still find a means of examining it from as short a distance as can be arrived at. Helped by his knowledge of landscapes left behind him, he can get a general and pretty correct idea of the transmural view if he will only climb to the loftiest summit of the altitudes in front of him. Once there, he can gaze at his leisure, comparing that which he dimly perceives with that which he has just left below. Now that he is, thanks to his efforts, beyond the line of the mists and the cloud-capped cliffs.
One more important point must be noticed, one that stands foremost in the series of proofs given of the existence of one primeval universal wisdom, at any rate for the Christian Kabbalists and students. The teachings were, at least, partially known to several of the fathers of the church. It is maintained on purely historical grounds that Origen, Synesius, and even Clemens Alexandrinus had been themselves initiated into the mysteries before adding to the Neoplatonism of the Alexandrian school, that of the Gnostics under the Christian veil. More than this, some of the doctrines of the secret schools, though by no means all, were preserved in the Vatican and have since become part and parcel of the mysteries in the shape of disfigured additions made to the original Christian program by the Latin Church.
The days of Constantine were the last turning point in history, the period of the supreme struggle that ended in the Western world throttling the old religions in favor of the new one built on their bodies. From thence the vista into the far distant past, beyond the deluge and the Garden of Eden, began to be forcibly and relentlessly closed by every fair and unfair means against the indiscreet gaze of posterity. Every issue was blocked up, every record that hands could be laid upon, destroyed. Yet there remains enough, even among such mutilated records, to warrant us in saying that there is in them every possible evidence of the actual existence of apparent doctrine.
This accounts for the necessity under which the writer has labored to be ever explaining the facts given from the horriest past by evidence gathered from the historical period. No other means was at hand, at the risk even of being once more charged with a lack of method and system. The public must be made acquainted with the efforts of many world adepts, of initiated poets, writers, and classics of every age, to preserve in the records of humanity the knowledge of the existence, at least, of such a philosophy, if not actually of its tenets.
The initiates of 1888 would indeed remain incomprehensible and ever a seemingly impossible myth, were not like initiates shown to have lived in every other age of history. This could be done only by naming chapter and verse where may be found mention of these great characters, who were preceded and followed by a long and interminable line of other famous antediluvian and post-diluvian masters in the arts. Thus only could be shown on semi-traditional and semi-historical authority that knowledge of the occult and the powers it confers on man are not altogether fictions, but that they are as old as the world itself.
Thank you. Hal will be giving a reading now from the Secret Doctrine on immortality.
Just as milliards of bright sparks dance on the waters of an ocean above which one and the same moon is shining, so our evanescent personalities, the elusive envelopes of the immortal monad ego, twinkle and dance on the waves of Maya. They last and appear as the thousands of sparks produced by the moonbeams, only so long as the queen of the night radiates her luster on the running waters of life, the period of the Manvantara. And then they disappear, the beams, symbols of our eternal spiritual egos, alone surviving, remerged in and being, as they were before, one with the mother source.
Distant hands in foreign lands are turning hidden wheels, causing things to come about which no one seems to feel. All invisible from where we stand, the connections come to pass, and though too strange to comprehend, they affect us nonetheless. Yeah. Once again, a time of change. Oh, the change makes music, and the children will dance. See the pieces of the picture rearrange themselves. It feels just like a symphony to me, with nothing left to chance. Just look over your shoulder. It's out of your hands. It's over for now. Leave behind what you can. You can always return. The rhythm remains unbroken, unspoken, but loud and clear. It's a slow vibration, migration. Oh, mystery muse, how I hunger for an answer. Unsung song, how I long to play the changes. Hidden rhythm, haven't I always been your dancer? Secret, secrets of meaning to my dreaming migration.
With the keys that Helena Petrovna Blavatsky gave us, we can see the theosophy that exists all throughout our humanity. In regards to those keys, the writing of the Secret Doctrine, we have a talk today on the challenges and the opportunities of such an epic work.
Thanks, Laura. As was mentioned earlier, we in 2025 and finally available now in 2026, we published a new edition of the Secret Doctrine with some updates and such. And first, Jerry asked, maybe I could just give a little talk and just kind of run through what we've done. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized you need a little bit of history first before we can, understand why a new edition was even necessary, for starters. So I thought I would go through some of the history of the writing of the Secret Doctrine. It's a fascinating story. It's, theosophical historians, some really great researchers have pieced together a lot of the pieces of how the writing of the Secret Doctrine happened. We have all kinds of letters from Blavatsky and others and testimonies from people who were there working with her and such. So we'll go over a little bit of that. And there's way more than we can cover in a short little talk, but I'll go through and hit on some main points that we can bring in, and then that'll inform a little bit more of to what we've done now with this new edition and why. So, the first thing is actually the Secret Doctrine was an ever-changing thing. The actual writing of the Secret Doctrine started as far back as 1884, even though it wasn't published until 1888. And along that whole stretch, there was lots of changes in the direction. There was different plans of what the Secret Doctrine was supposed to be. The earliest was essentially to take Isis Unveiled and rewrite it. That was the initial idea. Now, there's two books that were sort of at the forefront in the Theosophical movement at that time. One is Isis Unveiled, and the other is Esoteric Buddhism by Sinet. And with that esoteric Buddhism work, what we realized with that is that the HPB's teachers, the Mahatmas, they were working directly with Sinet, and that informed his book. So they were giving certain teachings that could come out and be public in the world. Now, there's an interesting letter from KH to Sinet where he says, around 1884, where he says, well, we're not able to give any more new teachings out. So now what's left to happen is we need to let the chelas in Adyar at that time to go to work on what you've produced and cast it into a more systematic form. The other thing that they wanted to do was correct some of the errors, because there are some mistakes that Sinet made in his perceptions. So the initial idea of the Secret Doctrine was basically, let's take Isis, which they weren't happy about. HPB wasn't happy about it. Her teachers weren't happy about it. And let's rewrite it. At the same time, let's correct some of the stuff that's in esoteric Buddhism and just present the world with a more clear, more systematic vision of these teachings. The initial idea was actually that this was going to be serialized by the printers of the Theosophist magazine in India. So they were going to just put out 70-page pamphlets, and they were going to run that for a couple of years. And the idea was probably 20 parts, which would have been about 15 or 1600 pages. The other thing off the start was that Subarro, who was a co-chela of Blavatsky's with the same master, was going to be a co-writer and co-author. And actually, Blavatsky wanted Subarro to write the majority of commentaries and such in the book, but that plan didn't work out. Around 1885, there's that initial idea of let's just rewrite Isis Unveiled got changed. And apparently that change came from Master M. Olcott writes about this, that there was a change in plan. Now, that change in plan resulted in something totally different. That change in plan also corresponded with HPB having to leave India and go to Europe. So that shuffled a lot of things up. And by the time HPB got to Europe, the plan for the Secret Doctrine had settled into this sort of 4-volume historical treatise. It was going to be volume 1 was going to be called Archaic, and then Ancient, and then Medieval, and then Modern. And it was going to walk through the teachings in a kind of historical context. Sometime around then, permission was also granted to now use the stanzas of John, and that seems to have changed everything. So initially, that wasn't part of the plan. At a certain point, that becomes part of the plan, and when it becomes part of the plan, things change. So that in what I've got here as Plan 3, around that time, things shift around a little bit. HPB first off writes a 600-page introductory book that she says, this needs to precede the Secret Doctrine. She says, I want this book to be read first, because if people go straight to cosmogony and anthropogony and they get into all that, she says it's going to be way too metaphysical. So she wrote a book that was basically a history of the atoms. Now that became an introductory book, and what was originally called Archaic was going to be the original volume 1. That's what ended up becoming commentaries on the stanzas of John. So that Archaic becomes what we now know as Cosmogenesis. So we have this shuffling of all these different ideas. And when HPB's in Europe, she's just writing like mad. We'll go over that in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about what she was doing and the incredible effort she was putting into the writing. When she was writing there, she was just pumping out stacks of manuscripts. And the idea was that there was going to be some commentaries on the stanzas of John. There was this giant introductory book that she wanted to lay out. But it was starting to get kind of muddled. There was so much written, and it wasn't very systematically organized by the time she got to London. So this is, as you can see, several years into writing the Secret Doctrine. She finally gets to London, and this is when she actually gets like really good helpers. So the helpers that show up in London, not only are they incredibly eager, they're also skilled and capable So they're able to help her a lot. Now, the first thing that happens there is that they say, there's a funny testimony from Archibald Kitely where he says, well, she handed over to us a stack 3 feet high of manuscripts, and we went through it page by page. And then we had to go back to her and say, well, basically kind of say this is a mess and it needs to be organized somehow, and we need to come up with a plan. So it was actually the Kitleys who came up with the plan that we now have, which is that volume 1 is cosmogenesis, volume 2 is anthropogenesis. Volume 3 then was going to be that introductory book that she read. So it was their suggestion to move that later on. That was against what HBB actually wanted, because she wanted people to read that first. But that would become volume 3, and then volume 4 would be on occultism, which essentially was never written. There's letters from HBB in 1891 where she's still saying, I haven't even started on it yet. So there's that. Now, what we end up with in the actual printing is volume 1, cosmogenesis, and volume 2, anthropogenesis. And that's what we call now the Secret Doctrine. But there's a long road to get there. And that's what we've just kind of summarized a little bit here. Now, I'm going to go on. Jerry, can you go to the next slide, please? And we've got tons of information here, and I'm going to skip through some of these quickly. We've just gathered some quotes and stuff together that kind of back up some of the ideas of how the Secret Doctrine was written, the changes in plans and such. Now, there's some really interesting ones here, but for a short talk, we don't have time to go into all of them. But this talk will be recorded, put online. Once it's online, people can pause on these slides. You can have a look and read through them. So that's kind of how we'll go through it here now. On this slide, I just want to draw attention to the third quote down. Starts, we can give no further information. That's a really fascinating one. That's from KH, where he's saying, we can give no further information on the subject already approached by you. That's Sinet in his Esoteric Buddhism. We have to leave the facts already communicated to be woven into a consistent and systematic philosophy by the Chelas at headquarters. So that's a good example of sort of the original plan there was, well, they had already given out what they were going to give out to the world, essentially. And Sinet had put that together. But now they needed their Chelas to take that and put it in a really good systematic form. So it's a really interesting idea there that the Mahatmas seem to have had a sort of limit on what they could do. They had maybe not received permission to give more. And so here we are. After that, though, then they got permission, apparently, to publish the portions of the stanzas of John that HBB used. So there's all kinds of moving targets here. These quotes are kind of interesting for that. Jerry, next. So here's just a few quotes together about what the original 4 volumes were going to be. That's the sort of historical treatise that it was going to be. And we'll just leave that so people can pause on it later. Next. Some quotes here on that original introductory book that she wrote, which is a really fascinating side story. I'm not going to go into detail here, but this introductory preliminary book is essentially what becomes the volume 3 that was later published by Besant and Mead, at least portions of, which is a really fascinating story. We have handwritten manuscripts of portions of that introductory preliminary book. And then some notes on the archaic volume, which became Cosmogenesis. Okay, next, Jerry. And finally, some quotes. Just this is mostly the Kitleys and how the original plan was then formulated to become the 4-volume set that what we got was the first 2 volumes of. So there's a few quotes there that are really interesting as well. But we'll just skip on through those, because what I want to really get to now, go ahead next, Jerry, it's a little bit about actually the writing of the Secret Doctrine, because it's a fascinating story and it says a lot about what who HBB was and what she was doing. So there's 3 sort of main points. One, it was a very collaborative effort. When you dig into the history, it's fascinating how collaborative it was, how many people were involved, and how often HBB was almost begging people to help. You know, she had some trusted people around her, and she was constantly saying, can you help with this? Can you take this? Please help me rewrite this. I'm not an English speaker. Can you please do this for me? And so on and so on. So it was a very collaborative effort. She had unbelievably challenging working conditions. She was extremely sick the entire time that she was writing the Secret Doctrine. She almost died during the writing of the Secret Doctrine. And yet she was continuously working 12 to 14-hour days nonstop for years. It's actually unfathomable how much she was able to do in the conditions she was in for all of those years. And the third sort of main part is just how much editing and revision and rewriting was constantly happening. I mean, the number of complete rewrites and cuttings and pastings and notes and margins. And when you hear from the people who were working with her, it feels like it was a complete nightmare trying to put the book together. And that's a really interesting one, which we'll touch on in a little bit, because that leads into why not only ourselves now, but why people like Mead in the late 1900s, why people like Boris Dezerkov in the mid 20th century had said, well, actually, this book needs some editing, because it was a really rough process as it was being put together early on. So we'll go through a few of these things in a bit, but I just, under the last little line on this slide here, we've got this little note about the result. Now, this is essentially why we decided to produce a new edition where we do some very restrained correction and updating and fixing of references and spellings and things like that. Because the 1888 edition, when it got to the printer, because of the scrambled nature of all these revisions and edits, is in pretty rough shape for a final printed version of a book. So we'll go through that in a little bit. Jerry, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few slides really quickly here again. The first one here is some really interesting quotes in it. This is about how the Mahatmas themselves helped HPB with the writing of the Secret Doctrine. I'm sure some of you know some of these quotes already. The second quote, that's actually a mistake in the second quote. That's not HPB to Hubschleiden. That's actually Hubschleiden himself talking about HPB. So I have an error there. But the third and fourth quotes are famous ones that I'm sure many of you have heard before, which are testimonies by KH and M to the fact that they were essentially co-authors of the Secret Doctrine with HPB. So there's some interesting quotes there people can look at later. Next. The other really fascinating part when you dig into the history is the occult method aspect of the writing of the Secret Doctrine. Now, lots of us have heard little things here and there about that, and how much can we really know about it? But here's a few quotes from HPB that are really fascinating about what was going on for her. One of the things we hear a lot about is the astral light idea, looking into the astral light for information or for references and such. The second quote down is a really fascinating one in that, where apparently HPB's master had said, actually, it's too difficult for you to be doing that right now, so we're going to do something different. So that may be because of her health, who knows? But there's this other method that was happening when she wrote Isis Unveiled, and also again with the Secret Doctrine, where she says she was being shown things in kind of visions and such. There's also the third quote down where she says she just wrote for a whole stretch of time where she was just listening. Now, who or what she was listening to is not clear, but there's some really interesting ideas about these kinds of occult methods of writing that were occurring. Next year. Now, the occult methods of writing is one thing. The other thing is that there was just a lot of just regular old sitting at a desk with a pen and writing nonstop, hours and hours and hours, till 1 a.m. Her regular routine was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., nonstop writing every day with a little break for lunch. That was the day. And that went on for years. So, you know, the condition of work, I think, when we go into it and we really look at these testimonies of people who were with her at that time and her own notes on it, is actually unbelievable what she was doing. All right, next, Jerry. Now, despite there being occult methods and there being all kinds of things, and her just sitting at her desk writing nonstop, there was a lot going on with others helping her out. And it's really fascinating to see some of the things that were occurring with all of that. So, for instance, she was with a few people that she really trusted. She said, you just do what you want to do with what I've written. She would write something, she would hand it off to somebody. I mean, she was doing this with Subarow in the beginning. She did this with the Keatleys later on, where she would say, here, take this, please just rewrite it if you think it's needed to be rewritten. She says here in the second quote down, I give you carte blanche. She kept saying things to the Keatleys like, make it as though it's your own. And of course, they were all nervous to do that because they're like, we don't know this stuff well enough to do that. But that's how her attitude was. Her attitude was, I've written the manuscript. You guys just do what you need to do with it next. The second to last quote is a really interesting one. This E.D. Fawcett, who was staying with her for a while, he worked with her on the second volume. And one of the things that it says here is, he suggested, corrected, and wrote. And several pages of his manuscripts were incorporated by HPB into her work. So there are portions of the second volume of The Secret Doctrine that were actually written by Fawcett, and she approved and brought them into her work. So there's all kinds of that happening during the writing period, and it's really fascinating when you get into it a bit more. Okay, next. This one is an interesting one. The Keatleys weren't satisfied with the commentaries on the stanzas. They said, hey, you've promised all these commentaries and there's barely any. Can you do more? And then she, read the bottom of the first quote there. She kind of tells them off a little bit about it. She says, why do you need this? Like, it's as the stanzas are as plain as the nose on your face, So, but they went through this process with her where they encouraged her to write more commentaries. And the way they did it was she got them to write questions about each stanza or each sloka, and then she would write her commentaries based on their questions. So it's a really interesting collaborative effort that was happening there. Okay, next, Jay. This one and the next slide are both just compilations of some quotes about the kind of editorial work that was being done by those who were working with her. So for instance, the Keatleys, they say at the top that they're engaged in reading, rereading, copying, correcting, casting some of the sentences in English because they were literal translations from French. I mean, her English wasn't the best. She was fully admitted to her English not being the best. So she was always asking for help with their English. They were doing verification of quotations. They were also inserting their own quotations of Greek, Hebrew, and Sanskrit texts. So there's a lot of work that they were doing with it. Now, the bottom quote here is the one that I find the most hilarious, and it really exemplifies the struggle at the very end of the printing of The Secret Doctrine. They say, HBB read and corrected 2 sets of galley proofs. Now, we got a video coming up in a couple minutes. Going to tell you a little bit about what that means. Then a page proof, then finally a revise in sheet, correcting, adding, and altering up to the very last moment. And the result, a printer's bill for corrections alone over £300. Now, £300 in 1888 is £50,000 in today's dollars, to give some context for the amount of editing that she was doing at the last minute. Okay, next. Quotes here about the Keatleys and Mead. One of the interesting things is that, The Secret Doctrine was published before J.R.S. Mead got to headquarters and was living and working with HBB. And that's kind of a shame because he was an incredibly gifted editor. And from the moment he arrived, beginning of 1889, to the end of her life, everything she wrote, she gave to him the manuscript and he edited it. That includes the voice of the silence, as it says there in the second quote. That includes everything, all the Lucifer articles, some of our favorite articles, Psychic Noetic Action, these articles that were appearing in Lucifer in the last days. The routine was she would write it on a manuscript, hand it to Mead. Mead would do whatever he wanted to do with it and publish it. So he was very involved. Now, he wasn't there in 1888 to help with The Secret Doctrine. And that's a little bit of a shame because he probably would have helped with a lot of the minor corrections that needed to be made and the spelling and the English and all that stuff. So, okay, Jerry, next. Now, here's the sort of final quote that I want to go, and then we'll watch a short little video, take a little break. This is from James Price. Now, James Price was head of the HBB Press, I believe. He was one of the ones who was in charge of publishing books in London for HBB at that time and after her death. Here's a quote from him. He says, "It was obvious to anyone familiar with the literary and mechanical details of book publishing that the manuscript of the SD had not been properly prepared for the printer, and that the proofreading had been so carelessly done, and that even glaring grammatical errors inadvertently made by the author had been allowed to stand." Now, the rest of that quote is in regards to the edition in 1893 that Mead put out, and Price is essentially defending that edition, saying, well, the editing that Mead did in 1893, that kind of editing actually should have happened before in 1888, before it was even published. So, what we have with the Secret Doctrine from 1888, the state of what was actually published is essentially what you would normally have for like a final draft before it goes back to everybody for like really further proofing, editing, all of that stuff. And it didn't get that treatment at that time in 1888. Now we're going to go pause for a second here from me talking and watch a little video to just give us a little taste of what printing was like back then for some context of the difficulty that was happening for HPB. Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
Each book begins in the Foundry, where Brian Ferret spends his day at a monotype machine from the 1890s making individual letters.
It can be very, very difficult. There could be days where nothing goes right. There could be weeks where nothing goes right. When I have 3 casters running and nothing's going wrong, that makes me just ridiculously happy.
He lights a fire under the machine, melting the lead, tin, and antimony solution that is used to create the letters.
We have a pump here and a nozzle, and the pump draws up the lead and then we'll shoot the lead out the nozzle.
From there, the lead goes into a mold. Then, a mat case with the chosen lettering pushes down on it. He sends the finished type down the hall to the print room.
By the end of the day, particularly when we're printing, we're covered with ink, and it's just fantastic. It's kind of like a good little kid again, getting messy and getting dirty. At this stage of the process, the Foundry has sent us galleys of type. They usually come out about 2 pages per galley. When we get those galleys, we take a proof print of that.
Jeff Raymond arranges the type into a page layout, letter by letter.
So on this one, this is page 53.
To keep the page together, Jeff wraps it in string. Then he brings it to the proofing press to check for any mistakes. Once the proof looks good, it goes for the final print run on one of the larger presses. The final stage of the bookmaking process is in the bindery.
This is where everything gets made into the book from scratch.
Megan Gibbous folds, sews, and glues each piece of the book together by hand. The final product is a work of art.
Okay, a little different than how we print books today. So you can imagine a galley proof being changed by HPB multiple times, how much work that would make for. So that gives a little bit of context for what it would have been like. I mean, there's also different printing methods, and that video is not exactly necessarily the exact method that was used, but it gives you good context for that. So this next slide here is just a little bit of a summary of sort of the editions of the Secret Doctrine that have come out. We have obviously the first edition from 1888, and then something that they called the second edition, but it was actually just a complete facsimile reprint of the first edition in 1889. And that's just because the original 500 copies in 1888 sold out before it was even on the press. So they had 2 printings. And then there's the edition 1893 by GRS Mead, which is a revised edition. Right. In addition to that, you have the 3rd volume that was published by Mead and Besant in 1897. And that sort of became the standard. At that time, that was the available printed edition of the Secret Doctrine. If you hadn't gotten yourself one of those early copies in 1888 or 1889, this 4-volume set would likely have been the set that you had. So it would have been Mead's volume 1 and 2, the volume 3 from Besant with an index. And that was a sort of 4-volume set. Now, those were used by everybody. I mean, even early ULT used those editions, and you find in early writings within ULT, within the Theosophy magazine and such, for example, references to the pagination of that 1893 edition rather than the 1888 edition. And so those were in circulation, they were being used. It wasn't until really the 1920s that the attitude towards those editions drastically changed. That's a whole history I'm not going to get into. It's well documented. People can look into it. But that changed, the attitude towards that changed among many Theosophists. And in 1925 is when we see the Theosophy company going back to facsimile editions. And that really changed the way that people related to the Secret Doctrine in the movement. So the tone that set, that the other organizations then followed is, we're going to go back to the 1888 edition. We're going to use that pagination. So all scholars and everybody started using that pagination. So that became the standard. Even when Boris de Zirkov did his his version of the collected writings, which includes heavy editing, right? It's a very the collected writings series has a lot of editing in it, which is not a bad thing, but that's what it was. Even then, he decided, no, we have to stick to the original pagination. That's what we're doing now. So even his edition of the Secret Doctrine follows the same. Now we come to 2025. We look at that and we say, okay, well, we also have to stick to that, no matter what. So currently we're doing facsimile editions. Now we're going to do something different, but we stick with the original 1888 edition as closely as possible. Okay, next, Jerry. So that brings us to where we are in 2025, 2026. And there's a whole history behind what we decided to do here. So we looked at what was needed to be done. And essentially the Theosophy company was printing the Secret Doctrine using plate facsimile technology. So photographic plate facsimiles. Now that is very hard to do these days, to find a printer who can do it. And so by necessity, the thing that you have to do is actually recast an entire book in a digital PDF that then can be sent to your printers. So you end up creating a verbatim edition rather than a facsimile edition. And that was the initial idea. The initial idea was just, we sit down, we reproduce the exact 1888 edition as a verbatim edition, and we print it. The thing that happens is you start going through that and you start realizing, okay, well, there's some mistakes in here. You go through the Secret Doctrine dialogues, for instance, HBB talks about some of the mistakes. She goes, there's this word here. That's not the word that was in my manuscript. The typesetter got it wrong. Can you fix that in the next edition? There's other things like just there's an E missing on the word the. Like you start seeing these little things and you're like, okay, we got to do that. Like, let's do that. Let's correct those ones that we know are incorrect. And the thing is that just keeps going. As you go through it, you start just seeing more and more where there are mistakes. Now, they're not mistakes in the philosophy. They're not mistakes in what HBB is teaching. They're grammatical mistakes. They're citation mistakes. They're, a single foreign term spelt 4 or 5 different ways in the same book. So, there's these kinds of things. You just start seeing these everywhere. You can go to the next slide, Jerry. So we start going through and we start thinking, okay, well, actually, we got to make corrections to these mistakes. And the idea is essentially, when you're just reproducing a facsimile from plates, it just is what it is. You're not involved in the errors that are in there. The moment you move to reproducing a verbatim edition, where you're recreating a digital file that can be used for printing, now any mistakes that are in there are a conscious choice. Right now, if we leave a mistake in there, now we're saying, okay, we'll leave this mistake in. So it changes the dynamic a little bit in how we do it. So we started approaching it a little bit differently and saying, okay, well, actually, what we want to do is do as minimally invasive editing as possible. So we want to catch the things that we know and we can verify and validate our mistakes, misspelled terms, wrong references, and so on, missing quotation marks, which was everywhere, misspelled foreign terms, like the Hebrew in the original Secret Doctrine is atrocious. So things like that, right? So we established a sort of, over time, we established a bit of a methodology of how we would go through those. And the guiding principle through all of that was like heavy restraint. Like we are not going to make a change of any kind unless it can be validated that is actually something that needs to be changed. And we're not going to do anything that alters the philosophy. We're not going to introduce any kind of change that says, no, HBB got it wrong here. So we don't do anything like that. It's all editorial, grammatical. It's all that kind of stuff. So the result that we end up with is, with our new edition, if you put it side by side with the old Secret Doctrine, which we'll do in just 1 second here, it is page for page, line for line identical. So every sentence on the page is identical as you go down. The first word, the last word. Pierre did all of that work, and I think it was something like 60 or 70,000 individual lines to be lined up exactly like the original in order to do that. So you can imagine the work that went into that. Jerry, go on to the next slide. So here's sort of what we have. So here's a good example. I wanted to use one that's kind of an interesting page. So here's page 5, right? So there's the original on the left, and there's the 2025 edition on the right. It's just a little bit cleaned up. We created a new font that is as close as we could to the original. We used, inside that font, we created symbols. So those symbols that appear aren't images in the new one. They're actually font glyphs. Go on to the next one, Jerry. Here's our favorite, well, my favorite, page 200. There's the original, there's the new. It's just a little cleaner. It's just a little easier to read, a little easier to see. And not until you really look closely do you start seeing the changes. You know, there's a little spelling correction there. At the very top, third line down, there's a little page addition. You know, she says, here, look in volume 2 or in part 2. And we say, okay, well, that's actually page 590. Just a little helpful thing. Little tiny things like that you start to notice, but overall, it's the same book, which is what I was really happy when I got the printed edition in my hand for that. Okay, Jerry, go ahead. We'll just go through a few quick ones here. I just want to highlight a few things. Like these top 2 ones on here are really interesting because in the original manuscripts, they were numbering the commentaries on the stanzas 1, 2, 3, 4. Once they got into the printed edition, they started numbering them A, B, C, D. So some of the original references to number 1 or number 2 or whatever, they were left in place. So the second one down, so he says, see commentary number 1 to this stanza. Well, in the actual edition, it's commentary A to this stanza, not commentary 1. So you go looking for commentary 1, you're like, where's commentary 1? Right? So those kinds of things are the things that we focused on. In the third one down, you see a reference to the Vayu Purana. We've added the verse number. So you want to find it in the Vayu Purana, it's verse 417. The bottom 2 are references. So you can see the second from the bottom there, Valsalefs on Buddhism, page 97 to 950. Well, that's incorrect. There's not 950 pages in that book. So we reformat the reference to be an official reference. It's got the title of the book, the year, the way you would normally do a citation, and we fix it up. Lots of that kind of stuff. Go ahead. Next, Jerry. An example, okay, the stanzas appear twice in the Secret Doctrine, right? They appear in summary form at the beginning, and then they appear again every time there's a commentary. And sometimes there's discrepancies between them. In most cases, we just leave those discrepancies. In some cases, it's so simple to just add a little thing in. So for instance, in the first edition, you see on page 31 in the top left, it's missing the and then the circle. On page 98 in the original edition, it has it there, Swabhabat, the circle, right? So in our edition, we just restore it on page 31. So we have that in place there. Simple things like that. Go ahead, next. Here's a great example. Okay, this quote appears twice in the Secret Doctrine, okay, on page 19 and on page 542. If you look on the left, on the top, there's a spelling mistake. It says, or a grammatical mistake. It says, and is the time last, instead of and time is the last. We fix that, and then we also validate it. So the quote on the bottom, that's from Wilson's Vishnu Purana. That's where she quoted that from. So we can validate that's actually the correct quote. Let's fix that one. So we fix it in the new edition. This is sort of the process that we went through. So it's not changing philosophical things. It's just fixing up those things that actually in 1888, that's what should have happened, Okay, next. Here's one from HPB herself. So the bottom part here is a quote from her from the Secret Doctrine Dialogues. She says, radiant, it ought to be radiant, right? And it's put radical. She says they have made of primordial matter something political. She had a great sense of humor. So in the original edition, radical was a typesetter's error. We fix it in the new edition to radiant according to HPB's instructions. So that's a good example. Okay, next. There is a hilarious one. A footnote that should have been on page 242 is actually on page 239. Now, I'm just going to leave this slide. People can look through it in detail later. But basically, on page 242, there's 2 identical footnote markers for one footnote because the other one accidentally got put on the wrong page. So we fix it and we put it on the right page. Go ahead, Jerry, next. So this is what it looks like. The before on 242, there's 2 footnote markers, 1 footnote. New, there's 2 footnote markers, 2 footnotes. So, it's simple, but you can see how they were scrambling when printing, and there you go, right? Okay, next and final one, I think. The Hebrew. The Hebrew is terrible, absolutely terrible. Obviously, nobody knew how to read Hebrew, and they made a big mess of it. So all the Hebrew on the left is wrong, and then the Hebrew on the right side is correct. Now, if anybody here speaks Hebrew, you will look on the left and you'll be like, what are those words? They're not words. They're not real words at all. So we've just made those corrections and fixed them up. They're all very obvious words. They're very easy to know what they ought to be, like Ein Sof, for instance, Galgalim, for instance, Adam Ilyaha, which is the same as Adam Kadmon. So we just fix all that up. So that's an example of what we've done. And we now have a new edition of the Secret Doctrine that is as close as we could possibly stick to the original 1888 edition with as minimally invasive editing as we possibly can. And we're very happy with it and very proud of what's out. I think it's a great edition. And lots of work went into it. Kudos to Pierre Wouters for 90% of that work. So, all right. And sorry for going a little overtime there.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, John. I look forward to looking at those slides. And we appreciate the work that you and Pierre have done in presenting the new version. It's beautiful. I cannot recommend it enough. It is definitely a work of art. And the corrections are helpful because as a young person, I remember reading some of those references and kind of going, well, I can't make sense of that. So I would just let it go. Because usually back in those days, to find a reference, you had to go to the library and look up an index card and then find the book. And it became almost impossible. So now with this, I can just sit with Google and find all these different references, and it's so helpful. So again, thank you, John, for your work. Our next quote is going to be by Shobha, and it's a quote from The Friendly Philosopher by Robert Crosby.
True religion must give us a basis for thinking and consequently a basis for acting. It must give us an understanding of nature, of ourselves, and of other beings. Religion is a bond uniting men together, not a particular set of dogmas or beliefs, binding not only all men, but also all beings and all things in the entire universe into one grand whole. Just that basis and that bond are presented in the three fundamental propositions of the Secret Doctrine.
Thank you, Shobha. That's a perfect lead in to the importance of our study of the Secret Doctrine. So we turn the talk over to Jean Jennings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And we'll just preface this by saying that when we were asked to do this, Jerry and I were just discussing some of the thoughts about the difficulties or the apparent difficulties of studying the Secret Doctrine and recognizing the ultimate importance of doing it despite that. And so we tried to capture a few ideas, and in doing so, we just decided to write a letter to ourselves in terms of what this process is like. So if you'll humor us for a moment, this is entitled A Letter to Myself from Myself in regards to the Secret Doctrine. Dear Self, we have heard from friends that the book, the secret doctrine is too hard, too metaphysical, too abstract, and too intellectual. In the world of the occultists, seeking to realize the esoteric truths of eternal life, we simply say, these are useless words, concepts of a deceiving brain and mind. In truth, the secret doctrine is a mirror image, a part of the wisdom that is inherent in the fabric of our souls. To know ourselves is to know the secret doctrine. To give up on the secret doctrine is to give up on ourselves. The secret doctrine is not a book necessarily to be approached by hard brain logic, for the truth which it contains is greater than logic. It is not a book to be approached through mystical jargon or occult signs and decipherings. It is simply the natural fundamental nature of our innermost being, just as the three fundamentals of theosophical thought and action are inherent as the law of life in all things. In truth, the secret doctrine is but a reminder to Theosophists of their past lives, during which time they were in pursuit of truth, while they in some way served humanity. It represents the many ways, languages, stories, and sacred myths which we have created ourselves in the past to remind ourselves in the present and to awaken humanity to their truer inner and outer path of enlightened awareness and the perfectibility of wisdom in the service of all. We must never forget we are the determinants of our own paths. As we dare, so do we receive. We determine our karmas, our futures, and our awakening to supreme enlightenment and freedom, only to refuse such freedom in the service of all life, as indicated by the Kuan Yin Pledge. As such self-determinants, if we say the secret doctrine as a book and work is too hard, too metaphysical, too mystical, or too intellectual, so it will be. And our refusal to approach and assimilate it will be our failures as initiates on the path to the living community of adepts in a conscious and awakened manner. If we put off the SD study for the so-called next life, this putting off will become a pattern, an eternal habit, and likewise will we be forever chained to the wheel of life, death, procrastination, and eternal ignorance, forever wondering why we were not chosen to come face to face with our living teachers. In truth, we must become ourselves the choosers. We must realize the secret doctrine is but the reflection of ourselves as living souls. We are the book of the secret doctrine and more, and to give up on it in its hard copy form is to give up on ourselves for this life and lives to come. Such is our lack of faith and understanding. But when we persist, even without knowing it, we change. It is not words and meanings as understanding that equals knowledge, but the change of mind, heart, soul, and being, the change of vibration and resonance, the change of metanoia, the actual change into that which we want to know, a becoming of that which we seek to understand, that is the truer understanding. HPB wrote in the Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, page 126, your axioms of logic can be applied to the lower manas only, and it is from the perceptions of kama manas alone that you argue. Occultism teaches only that which it derives from the cognition of the higher ego, or the buddhimanas. And since the operation of the buddhimanas transcends words, sense objects, and cognitions, to judge of understanding the secret doctrine by those deceiving standards is nothing but an error. We should and must persist in its study, which is a study of ourselves and all life, despite the appearance of not knowing or understanding. And as we do, understanding will awaken within one in time. To give up is to be deceived by the lower mind, the very instrument which survives for only one life and remains ignorant. Yet those karmic ripples affect us for lives upon lives. Giving up, we lose the very opportunity we as Arjunas have pleaded for aeons. As students of Theosophy, we must not be fooled by the lower brain mind and its conceptualizations into a belief that the secret doctrine is too hard a study in life. For that is but a Mayavic illusion, simply one of many the enemy called self uses to deceive us. We will close with an application of the paramitas to this study of the secret doctrine as to ourselves. 1. Dana, charity. Be always charitable with your time and energy, devoting it to the study of the secret doctrine, and learning to share your fruits, which will blossom in time with others. 2. Shila, morality. Live the life to know the doctrine, so that your awakening understanding of the truths within the secret doctrine and yourselves will be reflected forever in your words, acts, and deeds. 3. Shanti, patience. Be patient with yourselves and others, as with the teachings. Deeply understand that the patience of continuous endeavor will bear fruit in its right time and way. 4. Viraga, indifference. Be indifferent to the whims and complaints of the lower mind, and forever keep your motive, vision, and intent on the conquering of illusion and the establishment of truth, and truth will be revealed through the words of the secret doctrine and within oneself. Virya, having perseverance in vision, indifference, and enduring patience, with the lack of understanding of the words of the secret doctrine, self and other, will develop in you that perseverance and endurance, which is the stability giving birth to the enduring spiritual logoic rock of all ages within one's heart. 6. Dhyana, meditation. Being mindful and meditative through the heart on what one senses, knows, and does not know, concerning the Secret Doctrine as a book and the Secret Doctrine within oneself will bring one to a gradual awakening, like night seamlessly transitioning to a gentle daybreak, ever moving towards brightness as rightful understanding. Finally, 7, prajna, or wisdom. And with such persistence, service, indifference, and mindful meditation on the Secret Doctrine and self, one will softly sense the gentle arisal of the eternal light of prajna, which will illuminate the book of life, or of the so-called Secret Doctrine, within, without, and throughout all things. It is only in this wisdom that one can sense and realize that the ideas concerning the Secret Doctrine, being too hard, too metaphysical, too intellectual, too mystical, etc., are wrong and full of the blinding and binding lies of Maya. Never give up on the Secret Doctrine, and it will never give up on you. Give up on the Secret Doctrine as being too hard, and you have simply given up on knowing your true selves. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, for that letter that we all have written in our hearts, but not so eloquently in words. Between your letter and the printing of the Secret Doctrine and the work that John shared with us, we can throw off the dogmatism of our lower manas, and we can take on the responsibility of our own becoming. We begin to see that reflected through the 2 talks that we've had here today. Our next quote is going to be read by Steve from The Studies in the Secret Doctrine by B.P. Wadia.
The study of the Secret Doctrine proves unprofitable unless the student sees at his own stage of evolution, in his own life, in the activity of his own complex nature, the unity which is basic, from which differentiation springs, and on which diversity manifests. Metaphysics is not a subject for consideration by the mind only. Therefore, there is no possibility of anyone fully grasping the meaning of the 3 fundamentals by the power of intellect alone. True science is not solely of the senses, however prominent the part sense perceptions play in its vocation. Thus, unless a serious attempt is made by the student to see the activity of the 3 fundamentals in the function and the process of his own individual life, they must remain mysterious and confusing and fail to inspire him to better life or nobler labors.
Thank you, Steve. We now move into the future. Thoughts on the future of the United Lodge of Theosophists, and Wes will share some ideas and thoughts with us in that regard.
Thank you, Laura. Well, we're kind of presented with a dilemma because the United Lodge of Theosophists is not an organization. A long time ago, an older student quipped that the proof of that is we're not very well organized. But the difficulty is that ULT is not just what it seems. To much of the world, it seems like it's an organization, it's a group of students. But we need to look at what Robert Crosby called ULT. He said it's a name given to certain principles and ideas, not to buildings, not to locations, not to websites, not to books, not to people, to ideas and principles. So the question we've been asked to consider is, how do we apply this for the next 10 years? What would ULT look like, this amorphous association of students, looking back 10 years from now? What should we say it looks like? I think perhaps one of the best ways to get a handle on this is to look at how it started, quite literally, in someone's living room. It started with the ideas and ideals laid out in the Secret Doctrine, in Isis Unveiled, in the theosophical literature, in the objects of the original Theosophical Society. This nucleus for a universal brotherhood of humanity, studying ancient and modern science and philosophy and religions, and making applications to our own nature and the hidden powers hidden in human beings. And ULT as that sort of living presence, that living activity amongst associates, that one-on-one and small groups, perhaps is a key to how we might look back 10 years from now. We were given an opportunity, 6 years ago or so ago with COVID. We were forced to get together in different ways. We couldn't meet in person. It wasn't considered healthy or safe. We know several people that died from the COVID, so it was not a vague threat. It was very real. And yet we've persevered. We've managed to regroup and we move forward. Perhaps Crosby's greatest contribution was to point to the teachers, but also to point to the necessity of individual students taking up initiative, finding new ways to get together, finding new ways of associating, finding new tools, not just relying on the past, but being pioneers in whatever way we can to look to the future and to look to those ideas and principles that Crosby called our attention to, that were there all along in the theosophical philosophy. But sometimes it's easy to get to forget what those ideas are. He said simply, unity, study, work. You stay with those things. Be united about what Theosophy is, but don't be dogmatic. Take a look at what these principles are. Look at the Secret Doctrine, not just as a book, but as Jean just wonderfully pointed out, it represents the keys to our own nature. Secret Doctrine is found throughout the theosophical literature, not just in the book of that name. It's found in Crosby's talks. It's found in Judge's letters. It's found in throughout the articles and other works of the theosophical philosophy. And it's there and accessible in wherever we are, wherever each of us is, becomes the growing tip, that seed of future work that all of us can engage in. We need to remember not to get attached to our tools, to our methods, to our past, but become firmly attached to our ideas, ideals, and our principles. So if we were to look back 10 years from now, what would we see? We could certainly see a renewal. We could see new energies. We could see old places being put to new purposes. We could see a renewed interest in the Secret Doctrine as a book and the Secret Doctrine within each of us. Individuals can reach out to each other to make new friends, make new alliances, to make new contacts. The future of ULT will be what we make it. It will be in those reconnections and connections that we make from day to day and year to year, through classes, through shared experiences, meeting wherever possible, connecting in whatever way we can, if not in person, then by phone, by email, by text, and in whatever form of association we can find that is both effective and, in an ironic sense, very personal. Because impersonality is a two-edged sword. We can become so impersonal that we forget we're dealing with each other as persons, as well as eternal souls. So the question then becomes, is the future of ULT a particular destination? Or is it a process? Is it a process of reconnecting, of finding ideas and finding inspiration in these ideals, in renewing our outreach to the world, in growing in our numbers, in including everyone that we can in our associations and in our connections with these ideas and with each other? So as we started the meeting, the declaration is a wonderful place to reconnect with these ideals. It's simple, direct, universal, and readily applicable. The methods we use, whatever they might be, as Crosby once said, the best method is a combination of all methods. So let's find out what the best methods are that we can use and use them, not because we're attached to any particular process, but because we have a common ideal, common ideas, a common philosophy that is truly universal and can be shared with anyone and should be shared with everyone. So that's really all that we can say about the future. We can't draw a picture of what its structure ought to be unless we understand deeply what its ideals are. And the structures will follow, the methods will follow, the processes will follow. And the inspiration is there for all of us in the philosophy, in the teachings, and in these ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and to the speakers and the readers. We have looked back over the effort of ULT, and we look forward to the efforts of keeping Theosophy a living, visible light in the manifested world. Like a flower, an organization will quickly fade once it stops growing. We can see over the first half of this decade, students around the world stepping up to meet the challenges within the ever-changing conditions that Wes pointed out to us. And we've adapted, and we continue with the effort of study and work of the original writings. But we also see something else, as was pointed out, that we begin to see the secret doctrine everywhere, with the keys that HBB has given us to this perennial wisdom. We see it blooming all throughout our humanity in so many different ways in every field of human endeavor. And so this gives us strength and helps us to keep on with our effort and forming that nucleus of universal brotherhood. It's continuing to form. It may not always be obvious on this plane of effects, but if we look closely at our humanity, we see an undercurrent of change where all the forms of religions will come together, and the wisdom religion, the perennial truth, will, in the work of the cycles, create new forms from the decay of the old thought forms. And we close today with a reading that Mr. Judge, a quotation from the second chapter in the notes on the Bhagavad Gita, where Mr. Judge quotes a poem by Walt Whitman. That we all labor together, transmitting the same charge and succession. We few equals, indifferent of lands, indifferent of times. We enclosers of all continents, all castes, allowers of all theologies, compassionators, perceivers, rapport of men. We walk silent among the disputes and assertions, but reject not the disputers, nor anything that is asserted. We hear the bawlings and the din. We are reached at by divisions, jealousies, recriminations on every side. They close peremptorily around us to surround us, my comrade. Yet we walk upheld, free, the whole earth over, journeying up and down till we make our ineffaceable mark upon time and the diverse eras, till we saturate time and eras, that the men and the women of races, ages to come, may prove brethren and lovers as we are. Please watch for our fall series. We'll be exploring the nature of death and immortality. That's the only announcement we have for today. So now we open up the meeting for everyone to comment, to share, and if you have any questions, now's the time. So again, thank you, everyone. That was wonderful. Found it interesting in the beginning of the first readings where she speaks about the two truths, you know, that she said how there are two different ways of approaching theosophy. And it came to mind in looking at this comparative study. The study that she presents in the Secret Doctrine is the study of the similarities and the search for the cause of all religions. And then in the second, she says that she acknowledges that there are those who focus on the differences and the form of the religion. And it's interesting how she acknowledges them and says, you know, you have a truth in your own way of looking at it, but here's what I am going to present. So she did it in a very non-dogmatic way, you know, accepting the differences of form, and but yet at the same time pointing to the similarities and the cause. So that's just one thought that I remember. Anyone else have something to share? Judy?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So I just wanted to thank those who have really, through great and immense labor, redone the mistakes that were in the Secret Doctrine, that they were essentially typographical errors and misplaced footnotes, etc., because I've had to deal with other academics who have tried to put down the Secret Doctrine because of these mistakes, which are really very trivial compared to the great message that is there, which HPB was really so humble in bringing to us. And what I also admire is that the men who did the great, immense work didn't put any redactions or interpolations in the Secret Doctrine, which others have done, I guess, to try to make it more popular or readable. And I can remember also a Jewish scholar who was immensely learned, that at one point he was actually putting down the way the Hebrew was written in a mistaken way in certain pages of the Secret Doctrine. On the other hand, he said the Kabbalah says that there were three different creations before our creation. Of course, he's affirming, you know, the three rounds before our fourth round. So, I mean, without realizing it, he really was affirming the Secret Doctrine. So I think the work that's been done by those in Los Angeles and associates have been very important. And of course, we have to thank the original writer and other helpers of the Secret Doctrine who lived in the 19th century. But the fact that we have it is so important, and we want to read it for ourselves and not let anyone else interpret for us. I think that's so important that you got to do it by yourself and no one else can do it for you. You know?
Well, that comes out in the history that we saw of the writing of the Secret Doctrine, that we see that it was such a collaborative effort, and how as students we must continue that same kind of collaboration and work in our efforts too, and not to dogmatize the Secret Doctrine, to make it hard and fast in our study, but actually to keep it a living, breathing document of our own journey, as Jean's letter to ourself stated. And so we have to continue to recognize that we have a responsibility to that self-effort. So thank you, Judy. Jerry.
Yeah, I wanted to underscore a couple things that were said just briefly. Number one, a fellow student years ago made this comment, and it's stuck in my mind ever since. He said, each individual has to create their own relationship with the Secret Doctrine, which I think underscores some things that Jean was saying. I mean, each human, it's the self-reliance idea that we get in Emerson, and the self-reliance idea that I think is pervasive in our literature and theosophy. This whole endeavor is to come in contact with the self within and to see it in each and every other person. And that's a very private enterprise. And so it's been interesting to me that even though so much of the Secret Doctrine seems impossible to understand, there always are things you run into, snippets, sentences, a passage, a page, a chapter that speaks to you. And when that speaks to you, then you have something to hold on to. It's like finding some gold in a river. So it's a little bit like when we study sacred texts of different kinds, you find passages that resonate with you, and that's what you're looking for. So that's just one comment. And then I wanted to pick up on where Wes was talking. I think the COVID thing did us enormous favor. Up into COVID, if you want to look at things objectively, our numbers were dwindling. The amount of participation was small. The number of young people joining our ranks were few. We were in a downward cycle. I don't think there's any denying that. John Fergus made a point in a previous meeting that the Theosophical movement has seemed to have missed a whole generation of people. So what's interesting to me is I think with the advent of the internet and the advent that we can get together this way, we can reach far more people. We can communicate and we can get together and do these things in ways that we could never have dreamed of before. But that's not, as Wes was saying, where things end. Not at all. I think as our numbers come back, as new people find out about Theosophy, and we have opportunities to share these ideas in many of the ways that Wes was saying, any method is a good method, then I think we'll be able to come back to meeting together. And my wife and I had meetings at our home in Ventura, and people from 100 miles away would drive once a month to come to our house, to come to a meeting to study one of the books. And we made friends with those people. We got to know them. They came so far that we felt maybe we should serve them a meal. My wife discovered that every single Theosophist seemed to have a different diet, and it made it almost impossible to canvass everybody's dietary needs. But we tried. And after a while, we decided just to go out to a restaurant and let people choose whatever they wanted to eat. But what I'm wanting to say as a final thought is that now that we're meeting each other online, that shouldn't prohibit us from making friends with each other. We have so much in common, right? And I'm finding in the study groups, whether it be online or in person, all these wonderful opportunities to make friends with other Theosophists, other students of Theosophy. And I would like the ULT not only to accomplish this ability of getting the word out, but also bringing us together as friends.
Well said, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry. That was very well said. When you were speaking, one of the thoughts came to mind of, encouraging young people to study the Secret Doctrine together with their own young people, not necessarily with us older students. And it came to mind about how maybe they need to give a forum called a Secret Doctrine Book Club, rather than a study group or a study class, this idea of just getting together and looking at the Secret Doctrine together, that young people might find, much more interesting for them. It's one thought that came to mind. Ava?
Well, it's actually Anders sitting here beside me.
Well, I would emphasize that I think to be active in group work, in study classes, as we are here in Sweden. The studies class we have every Wednesday has members from up north in Sweden, from Norway, and Eva was in a class with Russia as well. So we are in touch with, and the work to do this is that you need to do what Judy was into, was doing the work of your own, deepening yourself with the Secret Doctrine, because we have one of those Wednesdays a month is a Secret Doctrine, because the interest is there. So, and that is not just ULT people, it's the Theosophical Association of Adia as well. And some that are not so connected to any of the movements, but they are very keenly interested in this. So it's growing, and it's going step by step in that direction.
Yes.
And I think this meeting tonight, for me, it's shown that this is a very, very important event to take this step and go forward.
Well, it brings to mind that maybe there's not a day or an hour that goes by that there isn't a meeting, a theosophical meeting taking place somewhere, which is really, if you look at that from the point of view of the inner planes of our being, that would be quite significant, to have the meetings that are constantly going on around the globe on Theosophy and the writings of HPB. Monica.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to throw an idea out to you all, because I've been noticing young people so much more. I just don't remember being 5, 7, 9 years old and being so complete. It is a definite mark on the kids coming in that they have. I don't know if it's because they are entering into the Aquarian age and have to search for themselves, but there's a definite finish to them that I know I've never seen before. And so I wanted to know if that means that a person can more easily, at an earlier age, understand the difference between dogma and somebody just telling you what to do and connecting inside to these truths that Theosophy does. And knowing that, shouldn't we be on the lookout?
What do we think? We see all kinds of changes occurring in science, in medicine, in art, in we see that young people are exploring themes that are bordering on the metaphysical more and more. And so that might be occurring. And of course, part of the work of Theosophists is to, as it says in our declaration, is to encourage the work of humanity around the world in all its different forms. Environmental is another one as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Eva, or from the lodge there in Sweden?
Well, this time it's really thank you, everyone, first of all. Really wonderful. And I think that maybe one of the great challenges when we're going to share theosophical ideas is to remind ourselves that we're not sharing an object, but we try to share and instigate a process.
Beautifully said. And that was shown in the letter that Jean wrote as well, the letter to the self, that the secret doctrine is a process. It's a mirror of our own, it's a story of our own journey. It's a story of our humanity, you know, and it's oftentimes we'll just hear people read the secret doctrine as if it was other people in the past that went through those experiences. But those beings were ourselves. It's our journey. Jerry.
I just have to give a shout out to John.
Yeah.
I thought I knew the story of the Secret Doctrine. Today, I discovered I knew just 1/100th of the story. I couldn't think of any reason why that should be made it into a movie. It's so dramatic and so interesting and fascinating with so many twists and turns. John, your presentation was brilliant, and I think you could have gone on and on and on and not lost our interest. So kudos to you and all the people behind the scenes that put the work in. There was a wonderful amount of work done by others that we haven't mentioned. I know there was artwork, a lot of artwork that was done, a lot of care put into choosing the printer and the paper, and then just an enormous effort by a handful of people who probably don't want the praise that I'd love to give them. The literally thousands of hours of work. So, thank you.
Pierre.
Yeah, I would like to come back to that idea of how we participate. There are a few students who sort of complain about our online meetings. And what they forget is that one thing doesn't exclude the other. If you want to go to a lodge, hey, we're still around. Come to the lodge. Nobody is keeping you from going there. But there's one thing that we have to keep in mind, because sometimes people say, well, yeah, but online, I don't have the same contact with people. Well, our study classes are not for meeting of personalities. They are for meeting of minds. And I think that's a very important distinction to make here. It's a meeting of minds. And by the way, I just want to point out that John, in his talk on the Secret Doctrine, was actually stated a lie when he said that I did 90% of the work. No. I would say probably somewhere more in 55-45, and John had the 55 part, and I just felt like a monk for 5 years, 12 to 14 hours a day, putting down line by line and making sure that it fit. And I don't know if some of you see that in the Secret Doctrine. If you look at the first 289 pages, that's part 1 of the Secret Doctrine. Look at the spacing between the lines. It is actually quite broad. And I didn't notice it until I started doing that work. Once you turn to part 2 on page 303, all of a sudden, all the lines are compressed. So if the printer had continued the way he was doing, our Secret Doctrine would have been way over 2,000 pages. you know. So it is also my impression that the work was not so much done by a printer, but rather it's almost like an apprentice was used. Like, here's the Secret Doctrine, and here's your test to learn how to set print, you know. So those are little things that we have to keep in mind. And it was good that we showed that little video on how books were made in those times. That was a tremendous work. And when HPB decided to change something, everybody was pulling his hair out, of course, which they almost literally did. But again, so keep in mind that our study is a meeting of minds, not of personalities. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, it's, I think too, what the history of the writing of the Secret Doctrine shows us that the evolution and the process involved in it, and then maybe in a way then shows us that we have to be patient and persistent with our own process, with our own way of working with Theosophy as well. That, you know, that we shouldn't underestimate ourselves. I mean, when we see the end result there of the Secret Doctrine, there are some who think that that all happens by magic. It just happens at once, all at once. But then when you look at the history, you see that there were hundreds and hundreds of pages abandoned, forgotten, not used, changed, you know. And so it helps us to honor our own process as well, and maybe continue on with the work. John?
All right. Yeah. And just along that line, one of the things that's really fascinating when you read a bunch of letters and such from HPB when she's talking about writing the Secret Doctrine, or when she's writing to somebody asking for help or things like that, is just how humble she was about her own knowledge in trying to put it together. There's so much there where you can really feel for her that she was given this monumental task. There's a letter where she's expressing that, like, she says, if I could take Isis unveiled and hurl it to the eighth sphere, I would. She wanted nothing to do with any of it anymore. But she's like, but it's not up to me. Master asked to do it. I do it. And so, there's this exemplification of work that she gives, which is also, we can easily have this perspective of like HPB is just like so incredibly broadly knowledgeable and all of this stuff, and yes, true in a way, and also she was kind of like just barely not drowning the whole time she was writing the Secret Doctrine, because what she was trying to do was such a monumental task. And I feel like we can take good inspiration from that, because I know for myself and for many I've talked to in the Theosophical movement, sometimes we think like, who am I to write an article? Or like, I don't know it well enough to speak up in class, or I don't, like these kinds of things. But like, take the inspiration from her in what she did, that we can all accomplish something. We all have something that we can bring to the table. And we can, right? Like, Gene, your talk today was amazing, and Wes as well. Like we all have something to say, Yeah. We don't have to be an HPB, but we all have something, and we can be humble like she was, and we can offer what we have to offer. And that, I think, is how it keeps us, as a movement, keeps us going. It's never been a movement of one person, it's a collective. Yeah.
I think that's very important. That's never been a movement of one person. Beautifully said. And I can relate to her about the wanting to throw out the Isis unveiled. So many talks that I've given that I wish I could have thrown them out too. You abandon the talk as soon as it's done. You think, oh my goodness, that does not begin to say what we intended to say. So yeah, we have that as well. We have lots of comments. There was one comment, a question asked, do we have a WhatsApp community or a group? That question is asked. Does anyone know if we've got a WhatsApp? And we also have a thank you for Jean's lovely and accurate meditation. So, which it sure was. Any other questions that anyone has in the chat? There are a few links as well from Wes, if anyone wants to open them up before the meeting closes. Somebody wrote in Club Crosby. That's another, there's we go, Crosby Club. That one might be a good way of putting it, rather than study class. Yeah, just have a Crosby Club. Wes.
Yeah, I just call it a Theosophy club or whatever. You know, the personal connections, like Pete was saying, that we meet for ideas, but we also meet
Yes.
people.
Yeah.
And people have to somehow absorb these ideas, get excited about them, or it just falls flat. So it's a combination. Human beings are complex creatures, and we need those various kinds of interactions. And I put a couple of links in the chat. One was to Crosby's works. I mean, Robert Crosby brilliantly summarizes the Secret Doctrine in his talks, in his letters, in his answers to questions on the ocean of theosophy. You'll never get a simpler, yet more profound introduction to the Secret Doctrine than in the writings of Robert Crosby. And his genius was in pointing to the teachers and showing how their works were relevant, how their ideas were understandable, that the Secret Doctrine was both a great mystery, but also part of ourselves that we can learn to understand. And I think that's just a crucial message of Crosby's works and his life and writings. And I put another link there too, just to show where some of the interest has been. We have a small but growing group of young people at the LA Lodge who are putting on Sophocles' play, Antigone, a great Greek tragedy, rewritten in theosophical terms, and it's next weekend, live at Theosophy Hall in Los Angeles. I don't know if they're going to live stream it. I really wish they would. But the energy, the enthusiasm of this group of young students is quite remarkable. Their study class Sunday night is growing, and I'm fortunate to attend a couple of weeks ago, and there were half a dozen new people, probably all under 30 or 35. A lot of new energy, I think a lot of interest in theosophy. Their way of connecting right now is theater, but that's only one of 100 different methods, we could say, that will be effective to reach out to our next generation, to the future, for ourselves and for those that will be here 20 years from now as we look back and, wonder what in the world happened.
Yes.
So,
well, that sounds wonderful. Wish I could go to the play.
I wish I could too, but they not only took the play, they've rewritten it. So I would be fascinated, a lot of energy, a lot of interest. It's been underused venue for many, many years, but who knows what kind of new life will come to it.
Yes.
So.
Yes, Monica.
Yes, you answered some of my questions, Wes. Thank you very much. I know there are a lot of folders on different subjects found in the Secret Doctrine that allow a person to just zero in on and study. And I wondered if you, Wes, were telling me about, theater and all of that, but I was wondering if the same has been or could be done for young people. It's related to, what I was, I guess, noticing about the people coming in now is that they're a much more individual, and so that much more drawn to working on their own truth. That's the feeling I get. So I wondered if Theosophy has already put that on the roll, or if it's something new. I've seen a few books geared to young people, but not very many. So I just wondered.
A great
Thank
opportunity.
you, Monica.
Get writing.
Yes. Yeah, we have to
write.
we have to start writing, that's for sure. John.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on that, one of the things that I think it's great. Like we need to think in that direction. We need to come up with some projects that maybe some of us can work on to do that, to meet the younger people. And what I found really interesting over the last several years of being around young people who are spiritually minded, let's say, or they're on a quest, they're on a path of some kind, is they the amount of times I hear the word astral or akasha or Atlantis or all these things that, the it's all out there. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that if I go to people and I'm like, hey, here's this thing called Theosophy, you should look into it. They're like, eh. But if I just start talking to them about the astral body, they're just like, oh yeah, where did you read that? So there's a meeting them where they're at that I think is really important for us. I think the old version of sort of proselytizing, where we're like, here's our book, read our book, this has got all this stuff in it, it doesn't connect. But they have enough language and they have enough interest in the ideas. You can talk about karma and reincarnation. You can talk about astral traveling, and they'll be like, well, yeah, I had this experience. And then you just talk about it. It's those kinds of things. So the big part is putting ourselves in contact with people so that we can have those conversations with them. And maybe there are really creative ways that we could take some of the ideas of Theosophy and reformulate them to meet those people where they're at. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, John. Thank you. And so that requires us to study and assimilate as well. So for those who have to leave, we say goodbye, but we have 3 more questions or comments. So we start with Jerry, Pierre, and Wes.
I'd like to go last because I do want to wrap up the meeting soon, because we promised people that it would be 2 hours, not much longer. But right. let Pierre and Wes say their things first.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I just want to give a quick shout out to all the people also that helped proofreading the Secret Doctrine. So just a quick shout out to 3 or 4 people that really helped out with proofreading. Thank you.
Wes?
Yeah, thanks for that, Pete. It's really the unknown, the unacknowledged soldiers in the work. I just wanted to give a mention of 2 introductory works on the Secret Doctrine. One is called An Invitation to the Secret Doctrine. It's by a lady at Theosophical University Press in Pasadena, Grace Kanoki, who died several years ago, but was a brilliant student of the SD. It basically excerpts from the Secret Doctrine according to the famous Bowen article, How to Study the Secret Doctrine. The other is, I think, available from the London ULT, from their publishing, which is about 100 pages of excerpts. I think maybe it's a little more. A wonderful condensation of some of the key phrases, those wonderful things that inspired so many people first reading the Secret Doctrine. They're in there, summing up and some of the other just brilliant passages, as well as the stanzas and so forth. It's a wonderful primer on the SD if you want to just get a sense of what it's, how the book is laid out, and want to read some of the key passages. I think it's available from the London Lodge, and we need to put it in our catalog as well. I'm just making a mention to others here that have something to do with that. So thank you. There's a lot out there that can be really helpful to new students. Not to mention Wadia's Studies in the Secret Doctrine, which is about 200 and something pages or so of just brilliant commentary on the SD, and we've been doing that on Tuesday nights for about a year now, but in a Zoom class. But it's just there's material out there when, like Judge says, the ocean of theosophy is deep enough that in its deepest parts it'll overwhelm anybody, and shallow enough so that it's accessible to everyone. So at its shores, which is where most of us like to dabble.
Thank you, Wes. Ava?
Yes, we just shared a few words of wisdom from the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard in the chat, if someone is interested.
Yes, thank you. I saw that. They're quite beautiful. Do we have time to read one of them, Jerry, or shall we?
Of course, of course.
Okay, all right. Ava, would you like to read the one for us?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. For anyone who wants to read along, it's for reflection in the chat.
If I want to succeed in guiding a person toward a specific goal, I must first find where they are and start right there. The one who cannot do this, it is deceiving themselves when they think they can help others. In order to help someone, I must indeed understand more than they do, but first and foremost understand what they understand. If I cannot do that, it does not help that I know more. If I still want to show how much I know, it's because I'm vain and arrogant and actually want to be admired by the other person instead of helping them. All genuine helpfulness begins with humility towards the person I want to help. And therefore, I must understand that helping is not about wanting to rule, but wanting to serve. If I cannot do this, then I cannot help either.
Thank you, Ava. So, thank you very much. Beautifully said. Jerry.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring our meeting to a close and say a word of thanks. First of all, to all of you. Having an audience, having people, bringing our energy together this way is really important. And without your attendance and your interest and your thought and doing it live together, it doesn't happen. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your days to join all of this. I think it has a benefit that we can't begin to understand. I wanted to let you know that there is a recording of this. I think John's talk in particular was kind of depending on your maybe coming back to the recording to see a lot of the quotations and passages that he put together so brilliantly. They were just skimmed over. I'm dying to go back through them one by one. So the recording will have all of that for you. And then in the fall, the lecture series that will start up in the fall, the topic will be death and immortality. And hopefully we can all come back together again. And all are welcome, whatever lodge, ULT, TS, none of the above. The ideas are what important, aren't they?
Yes.
So we'll see you all next time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.